Hi everybody, in this video we are going to cover how to take an application that was written from one language and make it multilingual, make it support multiple languages with relative ease. It's actually a lot simpler than it sounds. So let's start reviewing the different topics that we're going to discuss. We're going to explain how to handle hard-coded strings. We're going to talk about using external translation files. We're going to explain the actual engine, everything that runs behind the scenes of it, and also how to collect the strings that are required for me to translate, because it's also important. So let's review this. First of all, in the code, there's a lot of strings that were delivered to you as part of the migration itself. For example, when we run the application, there's the string here that says, I don't know, modify, or wide, or all the messages, the internal messages and stuff like that. We may want to translate them as well. So let me show you where this is defined. In env, there's a class called localization info that actually holds all the specific local information, localization info. And it has a default version, which is for English, as you can see over here. But it also has a version for Hebrew, for French, for Swedish, for German, for Polish, for Dutch, and you can create one of your own. You simply take one of these, change them, and make them your own. And it actually has a string for everything that is coming from the original code. You can see automatic, confirm, OK, annular, all of the different texts that are used in the code, and you can go ahead and track them, find the references to see exactly where they are used. So if you want to change the general UI from being English to being French, well, we can just say here, in the program main, when the application loads, env localization info current equals new localization info, or actually in this case I want new French localization info. So just by adding this line, okay, now the text here have changed to their equivalent French definitions. So that's how you change the hard-coded strings. Now actually, obviously we do that in the migration, we also do that in runtime. If you're going to look at the user settings class, the one that is in charge of reading the INI, and look for localization info, we can see here that actually based on a definition called const file, we are changing the localization based on the different languages, okay, even including Japanese if you wanted. Another important thing to notice about this is the way you handle dates. You can set the date time format info to the correct info, and that will get you the days of the weeks and stuff like that in the correct language. Okay, formatting days of week and stuff like that, that's what you can control over here. And another important info for localization, let's put this on also in our program just so we'll remember it, is also the default date. Okay, let's have a look here. Default date format, global default, great. Great, so over here I can set the actual global default that will be used when we are working with dates. No, sorry, this is not the one I was looking for. Date format, date dot default format, that's what it is. For example, in some cultures it's DDMMYY, in others it's MMDDYYY, or in others it's YYY MMDD. So if you want to set that default format, you just go ahead and say date, context default format, and set it to the correct one that you want. User settings is a great place to go and have a look at these kind of things because you can see what's there for backward compatibility and how you can tweak this. Okay, great. Now over here it's telling me that I need to take using system globalization, of course. Great. Here we are. So now when we go into a program, we can see that we're using the French text. So let's just review what we've done so far. We can see that to change the fixed text, the texts that are kind of hard-coded, all we needed to do was to set this line, and to change the day of weeks and everything that is about date in terms of its understanding, we added this line. Changing the fixed code, fixed text strings. Great. Next, let's go and talk about the dynamic strings. Our application has a lot of strings in it that come from different places in our code, and we may want to create a translation file for those strings. For example, let's say that we have our customers screen, and in here we have company name in the title of this column, and we want this to be language specific. So the first thing we need to do is to create an external translation file. Let's open Notepad and say, well, when I say company name, I'll copy it from here. Copy, and I'll paste it here. Company name. Okay. I want to have the correct French impression of this text. So I'm going to go to Google Translate, paste company name, and I get name de la compagnie. Copy it and put it in our translation file. The translation file is built in a way that you have one line for the original language and one line for the target language. So we can continue and do this for another column. Let's go and take address and paste it here and go to Google Translate and see that address is spelled like this in French. Perfect. Now we'll save this file, ctemp french.txt. Okay? And now let's configure the code to load this file in runtime. So the class that is in charge of handling translations is called languages, and it's here in env. So I'm going to go to my program, to where my application starts, and I'll say env.language.load from file, and I'll say load the language French from the file that we've created a second ago. Okay? You can actually load multiple languages from multiple files, like French, German, whatever you like, and respond to that according to your code. The next thing we're going to set is the current language of the application. So I'm going to say env language set shared language, and I'm going to say fr. The same fr that I've defined in the previous line. So it will go to know how to get a translation from this file. Let's run this. So now when we're going to go to our customer screen, you can see that the company name was translated to French and the address was translated to adresse, or however you say it in French. So this is the underlying implementation of working with languages. You can create several translation files, place them anywhere you like, and then set the file, the shared language that you want to use in this case, according to some user configuration. Now, a great way to look at this is to look at the user settings, as we discussed a second ago, and see how it is used there. If we look for languages, we can see how the starting language INI parameter is actually translated into the set shared languages we've just used. And we can see that if you're reading the languages section, we're actually calling the load from file, the same ones that we've called in our current program. This is how it's done based on the INI. Now let's go ahead and explain the underlying implementation, because by no means we think that this is the ideal implementation. You are more than welcome to take it and change it and make it your own. The entire code for supporting different languages is in the language class, which is surprisingly only 140 lines of code. It's that simple. Anything you want to do with languages is in this specific class. Now the way it works is that everywhere in the code, when a translation is in order, it will call the translate method over here. Okay, and go through the dictionary to figure out what the correct translation. If you can see here, we can see that it's being called from many places. And the real secret, or the real underlying infrastructure behind the translation, is that every control has a translate method that is being overridden in env. Okay, so every string that is displayed to the user will go through this translate method of the label or of the picture or of any other control, and then call the languages translate method, where it will do the actual translation based on the, in this case, the files that we created, but anything else. So if you want to go and change the underlying implementation of the way we do languages, read it from a resource file, get it from the web, hey, call Google Translate directly, this is the place to do it. One more thing that I want to talk about is figuring out which strings are required for translation. This is really one of the biggest questions. how do we know which strings do we need to translate? How do we collect the strings that are being used in the application? And bear in mind, some of those may be dynamic and may be created on the fly based on so many expressions and rules. Well, the way to do that is actually simpler than it sounds. We can just write here something, okay, anywhere we want to write it, and get the strings that are being used. I'm going to, in this case, write it to the Windows output, to the, Visual Studio output window. I'm going to say System, Diagnostics, Trace, Write Line, and I'm going to write the text that I've received. So we're going to run the application now by adding this line of code. In Visual Studio's output window, we can see all the strings that needed to be translated so far. And obviously you can recognize them. These are the menus that were used. Okay, so we can simply take these into our file and put the translations for them, and everything will get translated correctly. Let's proceed, let's clear, and go into our customer screens. Okay, and now we can see other strings that have been called, okay, to be translated. Address, city, phone, whatever. We can then go and copy these, put it here, put city in our Google Translate, get the correct French text for it, place it in my file, and do the same for phone. Save the file. Okay, we can save it as Unicode. And get it translated correctly. Cool. So far about how we use translation and how you can handle it, manifest it, change it, and get it to do the things you want it to do. You can actually use our original implementation, which is based on what we've shown you before, and you can use the ones we're showing you right now, or change it in any way you like. Now, if you want to look at a demo of how to use Google Translate to do some translations, there's a class here in Labs called Translator that actually calls Google Translate to do the translation for it. You need a Google key for that, but feel free to play with it if you want to try that. We've actually done it a few times and it's quite cool. It translates the application as you run it. Very useful if you want to go crazy. Last thing I want to talk about is reviewing what we've done. So let's go back to changes. We can see that in the program, okay, the program class, the start point, we've loaded the file that we wanted and we set the language to the according language determined in the file. And in the languages class, we can see that we've added the trace write line to collect the different strings that needs to be translated. Of course, this is a temporary, like quick and dirty solution to collect them. Feel free to make this more in-depth. Feel free to change these classes. This is the beauty of ENV. The entire code that is in charge of language translation is 140 lines. You can change it any way you want. I hope you do marvelous things with this and let us know, and I hope you find this video useful.